Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. I've been enjoying reading my short stories for my book Soloists, which is a collection of like 2 or 3 minutes long stories that are about people who are introverts or outsiders who are facing a dilemma. And I've now written 90 of them in this book. And I decided to go through them and pick out my favorite. I identified 16 that I particularly like and thought you might like hearing them. Many of them have already been in my previous podcast, but this is the assemblage of what might be the best of the short stories, what they call flash fiction, in my book Soloists, which is available on Amazon, as they say. Anyway, the first one is called Turning Down Harvard. At age 6, my parents bought me a Harvard t-shirt. At 10, they took me on a tour there. What I mainly remember was the triple scoop ice cream cone they wouldn't let me have. In high school, my parents advised me, every Ivy has a crew team, and few kids are willing to get up early in the morning to row. I managed to dissuade them. Would you get up every morning at 5 to freeze your ass off? But I took as many advanced placement courses as were offered, even though that sacrificed extracurriculars and teenagers' less formal pleasures. I took the SAT 3 times. One of my friends even took up the tuba, explaining, my college counselor told me that even Harvard's marching band struggles to find tuba players. In April of my senior year, I got the email from Harvard. Your notification is at your portal. For 2 days, I couldn't make myself look at it. Finally, we are delighted to, so on. The message's last sentence, we invite you to campus on April 24th for Discovery Day, where you'll meet your fellow admits, tour campus, visit classes, and enjoy a celebratory dinner on us. At Discovery Day, all proceeded as expected, except the classes. I thought, useless shit taught badly. And those teachers are no doubt among Harvard's best. After all, they're trying to get us to come here rather than to Yale or whatever. This is what I worked so hard for. This is what my parents are going to spend $300,000 on. The dinner was a buffet, with bar-height tables to encourage meeting and greeting. I told a number of students what I was feeling. For example, even though the Harvard piece of paper is a big deal, it's crazy for smart people to spend yet more time at a student death taught esoterica, but boringly. Well schooled in the art of politeness, the students listened respectfully, and one even paraphrased, so, you're wondering whether Harvard is the right choice for you? My typical response, if Harvard, education's pinnacle, is like this, I'm wondering whether college, any college, is the best use of our time. Each student took the first opportunity to escape to talk with someone who would cause less cognitive dissonance. When I returned home, my parents spurted, so, how did you like the mighty Crimson? I muttered, fine, and walked out, and I walked and walked until I had an idea. I was going to start a charter high school. Instead of a curriculum larded with what students didn't care about, my school's curriculum would emphasize relationships, money, choosing a career, plus what individual students wanted to learn. There would be virtual mornings at which the students at home would complete self-paced simulation and video-rich modules that were taught online by transformational teachers from all over the world. In the afternoon, the students would come to a local community center for extracurriculars. I submitted my charter school application to the school district, which didn't respond for a month, and when it did, submitted 2 pages of requirements that were impossible to meet. When I told my parents, they resumed the pressure. Just try Harvard. Otherwise, what are you going to do, work at McDonald's? I'm not sure what I am going to do. Anyway, that is the first of the 16 stories, and it's called Turning Down Harvard. The second one is called A 12-Year-Old Goes to Yankee Stadium Solo. I was surprised. You want me to go alone to Yankee Stadium? My mom replied, I know that parents don't want to seem irresponsible, but although you're just 12, I know you are responsible. You'll keep your eyes open. You'll be fine. In fact, you'll grow from it. I was scared to go. What if I get lost? What if someone robs me? What if I feel lonely? But I pictured how amazing it would be. Yankee Stadium. And then I could tell my friends that I went alone. When I got off the bus, I just followed the crowd. Left, right, left again, and there it was. The house that Ruth built. Mom offered me money so I could get a good seat, but they were like $30. The really good ones were like $200. Besides, I wanted to pay for it myself, so I got a $10 seat. I climbed to the fourth deck, hearing cracks of the bat at batting practice and seeing excited kids, tired old people, smells of hot dogs, nachos, beer. People were lined up at the radar gun. The sign said, "How fast can you pitch? $3." I did 48 miles an hour, and I thought that was fast until I heard that the pros throw in the 90s. Finally, I reached the opening for section 433 and climbed from the breezeway into the stadium itself. I had seen it on TV, but in real life, the lawn was so much bigger than it looked on TV, and the red dirt ringing the grass diamond looked like it was not for a game, but for a painting. But I was shocked at how far from home plate section 433 was. The players looked like insects, and I couldn't see the ball at all. And I was way too high up to catch a ball, even if someone hit a home run. My grandpa told me that Yankee Stadium had monuments to Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and someone, I forget, right on the field, way out near the center field fence. But they weren't there, which made me sad. That seemed a great way to remember the great ones, right there on the field. Plus, it would have been fun to think about someone hitting a ball all the way out there. The game started, and yes, I could hardly see anything, so a bad idea came to me. There were lots of empty seats right near the field. I figured if by the third inning no one sat there, I could. So I did and was amazed. I could practically smell the players, and of course could see everything. But only a minute later, a man in a uniform, kind of mean-looking, towered over me and said, "Ticket, kid." I said I was sorry and crept back out into the breezeway. But I couldn't make myself go back up to section 433. I had to try again. So I walked a few sections away, crept down to the field seats, and slunk down in an empty aisle seat so I didn't have to make anyone move. But an usher said, "I need to see your ticket, son." This time, though, the woman next to me said to the usher in a kind voice, "Oh, he's with me. He's my grandson." The usher sniffed, smiled, and walked away. I thanked her, and for a while I just watched the game, very happy, very, very happy. Then she saw me watching her keeping score in her program and said, "I'm not so good at this. By any chance, do you know how to keep score?" I couldn't believe it. I do that at home all the time, not just what the batter did, but how many balls and strikes each batter got. I said, "I'd love to." And the woman gave me her program. She even let me take the program home. I almost got to take home something else. A foul ball came right toward me. I got up and tried to get it, but it bounced around between the seats and another kid got it. But that was okay. It was so exciting to even get close. When the game was over, I thanked the woman again and practically skipped back to the bus. But I was stopped by a cart. I stopped by a cart with a woman selling Yankee souvenirs, including a packet of small pennants, one for each American League team. It would cost $19 plus $2 tax. I had that, but it would be 3 weeks' allowance. I got it anyway. Back in my room, I hung the pennants and wondered if I would ever again have such a great day. So that story is called "A 12-Year-Old Goes to Yankee Stadium Solo." The next story is called "Should I Kill Him?" On the desert island, parrots, macaws, and toucans chirped. The peace was broken by a shriek, so I wandered into the jungle toward it. There, snickering as he strutted away and wielding a bloody machete, was one of the island's few inhabitants. There probably are fewer than 10, yet I had never seen him before. I edged closer to see a toucan lying on the ground, his foot chopped off, suffering. Quietly I followed the man, and he did it again to another bird that had stopped to rest. He swaggered on, stopped along a stream, and chopped a frog in half. I was too scared to confront him, but had to keep following him. He strode along the stream, and when it widened into the river, a boy was bending over fixing a leak in his canoe. The man crept toward the boy, machete raised. What should I do? I also had a machete, although I had never used it on anything but thatch, and the last thing I thought I'd ever do was use it to hurt anyone. But the man would probably try to maim or even kill the boy, or maybe he wouldn't, or maybe I could reason with him, or should I fight it out with him, or am I too likely to get killed, and then both the boy and I would suffer? I thought of all the people who could have killed Hitler or Putin, for example, their close-by lieutenants. One shot to the head and millions of people would have been saved from suffering and death. On the other hand, it feels cosmically wrong to kill. So, like those lieutenants, paralyzed by indecisiveness and fear, I just stood there. So that story is called Should I Kill Him? The next story is called A Rebel Teacher. After a while, you stop thinking about it. You just do it. It was that way with me in the Common Core curriculum, which had just been mandated. I was told I had to teach the Common Core curriculum, and so I did. I was too insecure to question it and too busy worrying about whether I could control the class and have time to correct homework while still being a good spouse and parent. But unconsciously, wisps of doubt about the Common Core curriculum assumed ever larger parts of my mind. I should say a larger part of my mind. Then one day, after I dismissed my class, I was suddenly overwhelmed with sadness. It struck me that for millennia, teachers have been boring their students. Kids lived for the dismissal bell, and especially for the last day of school so they could be free for the whole summer. And I was a perpetrator of that 5-day-a-week, 180-day-a-year, 13-year-long torture treatment. Sure, the state encourages us to sugarcoat the Common Core curriculum with interactivity, videos, and such, but it's still graphing parabolas, split infinitives, and the Assyrians battling the Hittites. So I decided to replace most of that with fun. Yes, fun. Sure, we'd spend some time on reading, but fun stuff. No Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, no Little Women. And yes, the kids would learn math, but only important math. Estimation and probability, using dice and poker, not associative and distributive functions. The Common Core really does require the teaching of those in, yes, the 5th grade. Mainly my job would be keeper of childhood. My students have decades to live the seriousness of adulthood, but have precious few years to be kids. The currency in my class would be smiles, laughter, and yes, occasionally, downright silliness. For example, on random days, I'd come in costume, from Joan of Arc to Bozo the Clown to Sally Ride the astronaut. We reenacted key battles in the Civil War in the schoolyard, using snowballs as ammunition. We created short, fun versions of plays like The Wizard of Oz, James and the Giant Peach, and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Every morning and after every recess, the students would be welcomed with music that sets the stage for fun, from Cirque du Soleil to hip-hop. Then one day after school, while I was in reverie, as I was cleaning up after the world's greatest paper airplane contest, the principal walked in. I appreciate your exuberance, but it is, as Alan Greenspan said, irrational exuberance. I know you have tenure, but having consulted our attorneys, the law makes clear that you can be terminated for insubordination. You have been warned 3 times that you must teach the mandated Common Core curriculum. I am sorry, we are letting you go. Anyway, that story is called A Rebel Teacher. The next story is called A First Date. After an entertaining college life, which, extended a couple of years after college, I decided I'd like to get married and have kids. But I didn't have much of a network to use to get set up, so I relied on Match.com. To increase my chances of finding Ms. Right, I did the reaching out. That way I got to pick out who I wanted to see rather than responding, which could have tempted me to say, oh, what the hell, I'll say yes. And so I'd be tempted to compromise. And if a woman didn't respond within 48 hours or the response seemed shallow or generic, I moved on. There are millions of fish in the Match.com sea. Elena passed the pretest, and so I was excited while waiting for her at the Starbucks. Would she look anything like her picture? Would she be as caring as she seemed in her text and phone call? Would we have chemistry? And then Elena, a little tentatively, walked in. I was relieved that her face looked like her picture, although she was a little heavier. I felt guilty that bothered me, and I wondered whether that reaction is evolutionarily hardwired or a socially constructed bias. After just a bit of small talk, I couldn't resist bringing up the marriage and baby thing. So, you wrote that you're interested in a long-term relationship. What are you envisioning? I couldn't bring myself to say the words marriage or children, but she said them almost matter-of-factly. Oh, I'm looking to meet a husband and have 2, maybe even 3 kids. It felt too early to get into details, so I changed the subject. I like to get the bad news out of the way, so I said that I'm not sure I'm ready to give up my dream of being a screenwriter. What do you think of that? Elena's face seemed to drop a little. I stayed silent and waiting her out worked. She said, well, I'm not so sure about my career. I'm working in a nonprofit's PR department, but that feels too far from helping people. I really don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and I'm supposed to be grown up already. Well, at least sort of grown up. I liked that we were equally confused. We talked a little more about family, hobbies. We both liked travel and bicycling, and I decided I wanted to see her again. I wanted to end our first date while I was ahead of the game, or at least not behind. So although we had talked for only 20 minutes, I said, Elena, I have to go. That was clumsy wording, but I couldn't think of anything better. I appreciated her response. Did I do anything to turn you off? I said no and reflexively took her hand. I'd like to see you again if you would. Kind of flatly, she said, okay. Was she just nervous or was she just not that into me? I got up and then she did. Now, how do I say goodbye? Do I kiss her? No, that felt too early. Do I hug her? For how long? I looked her in the eye, saw that she didn't flinch or step back, so I hugged her tentatively, my chest barely touching hers. I was tempted to pat her on the back the way platonic friends hug, but resisted. But I'm sure that was the worst hug she ever got. That was 42 years ago. We've been married for 40 years, have 2 kids and 4 grandkids. I sell insurance and write screenplays for fun, knowing full well that they'll never be made into a movie. That's somehow freeing. I get to write what I want. Elena is now in her 25th year as executive director of a nonprofit that takes urban kids on bicycling adventures. While our first date was good, I'm not sure I could have predicted all of that. Anyway, that story is called The First Date. Next story is called Following Church Teachings. I was putting out my Jell-O mold for the church supper. To avoid it being the stereotype and to make it a little healthier, I made it in a heart-shaped mold and mixed in fresh cherries. Well, frozen cherries that were defrosted. Oh, but that's beside the point. Next to me, putting out her tuna casserole, was a woman I didn't know well, around my age, 35. I couldn't even remember her name, so I was glad when she was kind enough to not assume I knew it. She said, "Hi, Mary. Christine." I prefer to be quiet, but she was a talker, and before I knew it, she was telling me that she needed to move out of her apartment and was having trouble finding one that she could afford, even a share. Maybe it was because the minister had 2 weeks ago done her sermon on generosity. That minister quoted something from Corinthians, it was something like, "Each of you should give, and not reluctantly, for God loves a cheerful giver." So, without really thinking, I put on my churchy smile and said, "How'd you like to share my apartment? I'll only charge you $500 a month." No surprise, she jumped at it. Soon as she did, the doubts crept in. What if she plays loud music? What if she leaves the kitchen messy? And sharing a bathroom, I'll have to smell her, well, you know. But I didn't anticipate this. Every night there were, well, intimacy noises, loud ones. They were especially loud when she had company, but even when she was by herself. It wasn't just the noise. It was the reminder that for some reason I've never enjoyed sex that much, certainly don't crave it. I don't think that's because of guilt, even though when I was growing up, I still remember the Sunday school teacher pointing to the cross and only half kidding saying, "This is what happens if you have premarital sex." When you're in the 6th grade, you kind of take such warnings literally. At least I did. I tried to be Christian about it. I endured as long as I could without saying anything. After all, it would be unchristian of me to deny her pleasure, especially in her own home, even if it was my home too. Then I tried raising the issue in as loving a way as I could. "I'm pleased that you're enjoying living here," I said, "and feel comfortable living, living as you'd like. But I'm wondering if you just might be just a bit quieter when you're enjoying yourself, or at least put some music on so I'm not hearing quite as much of it." She was very Christian about it and said that felt terrible, that I had caused her pain and promised to be quieter, and she was for a while, but then started up again. I tried, hope against hope, to see if it was just temporary, but no. So I tried again, this time just a bit less kindly. "Christine, I am having a little difficulty with the noise. It's even making it hard to sleep, so I'm hoping..." Anyway, a few more weeks of ever less kind begging, and then I did what I think Jesus would think is the most Christian thing. I said, "Christine, I am pleased that you're happy here. I don't need this apartment that much. It's yours. I'll find another place." Anyway, that's called Following Church Teachings. I'm going to take a very 1-minute break so the announcer can do her thing, and then I've got another roughly half this number 8 or so stories to read you that I like, and hopefully you will too. Anyway, I hope you'll stay with me that moment. I do thank you for staying with me. This next story is called A Grad Student. This first part is true. A professor, we'll call him Dr. Cheney, invited all the students in his PhD program to his house for a party. There he invited us to his basement where a leather S&M swing hung from the ceiling. He smiled, "That's nothing," and he slid open a triple-wide closet filled with S&M toys like whips, chains, and ball gags. Now I turn to fiction. Well, sort of fiction. It's a composite of real experiences. I couldn't believe it. Admitted to Harvard University's doctoral program in education. I wasn't even that good a student. I guess it's not as hard to get into as the public thinks. I didn't stay as happy. The advisor they gave me, Cheney, was studying the relationship between reaction time and intelligence. That was far from the education career I was interested in, developing programs to close the achievement gap. And the courses discouraged me from that. If you look closely at the data on such programs from Early Start to Head Start, follow through to Stop Drop, they produce no enduring gains. Certainly none that justify such programs' enormous taxpayer cost. I was particularly dispirited by one study in which pairs of identical twins were born to a low-income mother who gave up one twin to a middle-class family. As adults, both groups were low in achievement and high in crime and drug abuse. And Harvard University made us take five unit graduate level statistics courses. I would never use that stuff. Mahalanobis's D-squared, structural equation modeling, non-parametric multivariate analysis. Even if my research needed anything like that, I would have long forgotten how to do it and hire a statistician instead. When it came time for my dissertation, Cheney pressured me into doing it related to his research. Because I wanted to get done and knew he would be less likely to torture me, my dissertation would be a non-parametric multivariate analysis of reaction time against 4 covariates in predicting non-cognitive responses to visual and auditory stimuli. The department's statistics expert said I could get valid results if I used 100 subjects, but Cheney smiled in a way that only a sadist could. "You're going to get 200. I said, "But the statistics expert said 100 would be fine, and it's only a dissertation, not some super-funded project. Getting 200 would take me an extra year, another year in which I'm earning no money." Cheney chirped, "That's it, chum. Take it or leave it." I left it, opened a bookstore near campus, and invited Cheney to the grand opening. So that story is called A Grad Student. This next story is called Faith Shaken. The pastor sat in the parish house preparing his sermon. Like most clerics, he occasionally had a crisis of faith, but found it easier to minister by not focusing on that, especially when sermonizing. A major purpose of the church is to comfort the faithful, and expressing doubt rarely does that. So the pastor decided to give his sermon on how God comforts, even when inexplicably bad things happen. He began, "We're all understandably shaken by what's happening to the poor people of Ukraine. How could an omnipotent, loving God allow that? We find an answer in Scripture. I read from Philippians 4:6 and 7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." So, dear parishioners, and at that moment the church shook. Fortunately, the earthquake caused only minor damage, but that raised the doubts about a loving, omnipotent God in at least a few parishioners, and yes, in the pastor. He then had to decide whether greater good would accrue if, in continuing the sermon, acknowledging his doubt, or would he be wiser to express gratitude for God sparing the church from greater harm? What would you do? Anyway, that story is called Faith Shaken. Next story is called Ugly. I am so lucky. Smile Bus came to my village and they did my cleft palate surgery. They didn't tell me, though, to look good and speak normally, I'd need many more surgeries. My good luck came when an American family chose to adopt me and bring me to America, even though I looked and talked funny. And they got me all the surgeries that the insurance would cover, but I still don't look or sound quite right. Now I'm in high school. I've tried a lot of things to be liked. For example, even though I'm self-conscious when I walk down the halls, I look up and sometimes even force a smile. When a kid doesn't seem to understand what I'm saying, I apologize and ask if he or she would like me to try again. But it hasn't worked. The kids are polite, but that's it. Being shunned because of looks is wrong. So I thought about running for student council on an anti-lookist platform. I even thought about getting a t-shirt that said, "Do you really want to be lookist?" But I wasn't brave enough. Finally, I had an idea. I would try out to be a cheerleader. Cheerleading is for the pretty people, and just maybe, if I could get on the team, it could show that you don't have to be good looking even to be a cheerleader. But when I asked the cheerleading teacher, Mrs. Lowood, she said, of course you can try out, but it takes a lot to be a cheerleader, especially on our team. We've won many awards. I got the sense that she didn't want me, but I didn't want to show me that, so she said, I'll consider it if you can learn to do an aerial. I didn't even know what an aerial was, but when I found out, I was sure she didn't want me. It's gymnastics' toughest stunt, a cartwheel without your hands touching the ground. But my mother said, hurry, you're athletic, you can do it. She's a go-getter, so she got right on the computer and searched for one-on-one coaches. She found a former top college gymnastics coach who was taking beginners. My mother said, it's odd that such an expert would take beginners. She called the coach, Mary, explained, I got, too friendly with one of my players and I was fired. My mom asked, can we trust you to not be too friendly with my son? Her answer, I'm a lesbian, but even if your child were a girl, I have more than learned my lesson. Mary worked me hard, but I tried to do even more than she asked. At first, the cheerleaders practicing on the other side of the gym didn't pay attention to me because I was working only on basics, a headstand and a forward roll. But when one day I was working on a round-off, which is the last step before an aerial, I think they got nervous. They didn't want a cleft palate on their award-winning cheerleading team. So the head cheerleader, Gemma, snuck over to me and whispered, Halloween Harry, gonna try to be a cheerleader, huh? Halloween Harry? And she pranced away. The cheerleaders may have gotten even more nervous when they saw me making progress on the aerial. Finally, Mary said I was ready, and I walked into cheerleading practice a few minutes before it was to begin. Mrs. Lowood seemed surprised to see me. She had assumed that she had dissuaded me by saying that I needed to do an aerial before she'd even allow me to try out. But she asked evenly, can you do an aerial? I nodded and she said, okay, the cheerleaders are here for practice, but I suppose you could do it for them. I got nervous, and even more so when Gemma smirked at me. I took a deep breath. My takeoff was okay, and I kept my legs perfectly straight, just as Mary had taught me. But at the top of my aerial, the hardest part, I guess my nervousness distracted me for just a moment, and I fell. The pain was bad, but I was able to keep it in, even when they put me on the stretcher. I couldn't recover fast enough to try out again, but the principal asked me to give a speech at graduation, and here's what I said. My parents wanted me to tell you that trying out for cheerleaders struck a blow against lookism, but that's not what I want to say. I want to say that you, me, everyone has had bad experiences, sometimes embarrassing failures. If my cleft palate and my cheerleading accident had a good side, it's to remind us that whatever crap has happened to us, we might want to stop looking back and just take the next step forward, maybe even do an aerial. Anyway, that story is called Ugly. The next story is called Amanda's Plan. Amanda knew she had to kill him. He was the only one who knew that she had siphoned off money earmarked for the on-site child care center, and hid that by using a too cheap cut-every-corner contractor, and so a kid died when the climbing wall collapsed. The floor-to-ceiling window overlooked a pier that jutted well out into the ocean. It was the perfect backdrop for an inspiring speech, and for murder. Troy, the CEO, intoned like a revival preacher. It is so exciting to see you at our 2022 offsite. Our wonderful products are not our most important product. Our most important product? Our employees. You. Amanda, a marketing manager, thought, what a crock. Of course our product line is worthy of you. Just think about how well priced our bronze line is, how our silver line perfectly balances price and quality, and our platinum product, best in class. She thought, yeah, with a lower repurchase rate than our competitors. As Troy continued stoking the troops, Amanda's mind wandered to the pier. She thought, he said he couldn't swim, so when he finishes, I'll ask him to watch the sunset with me from the pier. And I am so excited that we are having this offsite. I know it'll be awesome. He smiled too broadly and applauded the audience. The audience clapped just enough to stay out of trouble. After, employees lined up to praise Troy. When the last suck-up left, Amanda adjusted her blouse so just a bit of cleavage showed, sashayed up and asked him, want to watch the sunset? Troy thought, she just filed a grievance against me. What's this about? His wiser self would have declined, but he was riding the high of his keynote and the praise, suppressing that both were BS, and so, in light of her flirtation, he agreed. As they reached the end of the long pier, Amanda got cold feet. So she worked herself up by arguing with him. I still can't believe you wouldn't come with me to the abortion. Troy replied. There was nothing I could have done to help. She replied, that's not the point. Haven't you ever heard of the need for support? After all, you were the father. Guys are clueless. He responded, stop playing the gender card. Women's way isn't the only way. Support that accomplishes nothing is stupid. She said, only a guy could say that. Besides, you're the CEO. There is a power imbalance, and you took advantage of it. You're not. And then he said, you're not my direct report. She replied, that doesn't negate the power imbalance. And you also show what a sexist you are when you apologize for not coming to the abortion. And I said, put your money where your mouth is. Since you claim to care so much about your employees, create an on-site child care center. And you said that funding it would be unfair to the childless and to the shareholders. Fuck the shareholders. He replied, my position was reasonable and principled. I caved only when you threatened to go public with our affair. I think I'm going to tell the board and the media that you used a sleazy bargain basement unproven contractor and pocketed the difference. She said, and I'm going to tell all to the board and the media, including that you dared claim you weren't the father. He said, oh really? Well, Amanda, long ago I had a vasectomy, so I couldn't be the father. Want to see? I'll show that to the board and the media. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Of course, Amanda was aware that Troy might not be the father. She had slept with 2 other guys at the time. But all that feigned resentment about the affair and abortion accomplished her goal, getting her worked up enough to gin up the courage to get rid of him and end her worries about him going public with her embezzlement and now her false paternity claim. He started to lower his pants to show his vasectomy, which gave her the chance to shove him into the deep, rough water. No, you know I can't swim. Please save me, he said. It was one thing for Amanda to imagine him drowning, another to see him gasping, dying. So she dove in, helped him to a stanchion, and they climbed up. They plodded back to the hotel with a lot to think about. At the closing session, Troy and Amanda held hands as they strode to center stage. Both applauded the audience. Only a few audience members applauded, tepidly. Troy enthused, I have a special announcement. I have been so impressed with Amanda Frost that I am promoting her to vice president. Anyway, that story is called Amanda's Plan. The next story is called Average Jane. In school, teachers focused on the brilliant and on the slow, so Average Jane was pretty much ignored. Jane's classmates liked the good-looking kids and made fun of the ugly ones. They barely noticed Average Jane. At her 50th high school reunion, most people didn't even remember her. In college, while Jane wanted to date, she felt uncomfortable trying to stand out, being perky, dressing sexily, and so on, so she was pretty much ignored. When Jane applied for jobs, her resume didn't stand out, so the best she could get was rent-a-car reservationist, where she chatted little with customers or co-workers. She was forgettable. Jane liked hiking and joined a hiking group, but even when she approached people, the conversation quickly petered out and they'd move on. Jane did have some modest romantic relationships, but sooner than later the guy would end it. When Jane asked for an explanation, they said things like, there's nothing wrong with you, there's just not quite the spark. Jane thought that perhaps she could be special if she worked with disabled people, so she volunteered at a group home for people with intellectual disabilities. But she had difficulty helping them and got little recognition for her efforts, so after a few Saturdays, apologizing, she quit. Next, she tried volunteering in an animal shelter. She and the doggies loved each other, but that didn't feel enough. At the end of her 50th high school reunion, Jane trudged back to her car, gently closed its door, and cried. Would she die unexceptional, unrecognized? She sat trying to concoct a basis for hope. She considered dolling herself up, puffing herself up, bubbling herself up, but in the end decided the wisest course was self-acceptance. Jane spent her last decade reading, journaling, gardening, painting, petting dogs at the shelter, and volunteering at a suicide hotline. A go-getter might have done more to improve her lot, but Average Jane had just average drive. By definition, half of people have done worse. That story is called Average Jane. This story is called A Hipster. I was studying the Prada store window and must admit I looked the type. Ray-Ban sunglasses, Gucci shoes, natty bow tie. An old hippie passed by and said without stopping, "You're wasting your money and probably your life." I acted like I dismissed him, but couldn't. When I got home, I got undressed. I stared at my Rolex, my Falconable shirt in this season's color, aubergine, Ferragamo bow tie, Versace underwear, and I thought, there's probably just one little guy in some room in Paris who every year spins a color wheel, and where it stops, that's the season's color. In New York, another guy orders, "Wider cuffs last year, narrow this year." All that thinking made me feel uncomfortable, so I took out my practice sheet. I thought you might like to hear about it. Shoulders back, shoulders even, chin up 20 degrees, back straight, that winning smile, voice at the bottom of my range but not gravelly, modest use of hand gestures, hair slightly tousled with that curly cue in front. I practice in the mirror as I do every day, but this time the hippie's words kept intruding. He's right. It's what everyone says, my professors, the newscasters, even my minister. Hipsters are idiots. I'm an idiot. I felt I had to purge myself, so before I could change my mind, I threw all my clothes that weren't like basic t-shirts into the fireplace. I wish I could tell you I stayed with the program, but it wasn't 3 days until I was back on Rodeo Drive with my credit card ready to go. Anyway, that story is called A Hipster. Next one, I think it's the second to the last, is called My Wasted Potential. It wasn't until I was 70 that it happened. It was a random moment. I was planting a tomato when I couldn't get the truth out of my mind. It's not acceptable even to think it. I am a genius who wasn't allowed to make the big difference I feel I could have made. Despite growing up in a slum, a child of new immigrants, Holocaust survivors who spoke no English, I was reading on the 5th grade level in the 1st grade. My IQ was 150, was admitted to Stuyvesant High School and then Harvard undergraduate and Stanford PhD. Way back in 1974, my undergraduate senior project showed that toll booths should be replaced by drive-through toll playing, which would have saved millions of drivers time and immense pollution, all those cars idling. But although I wrote a detailed proposal to the Transportation Commission in New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, I never even got a response. My PhD dissertation demonstrated that the laws of genetics don't get suspended when it comes to human intelligence. It was among the first to show that, like most characteristics, not just in humankind but across the animal and plant kingdoms, genes and environment both matter a lot. Funny, the part that my professor seemed to like the best were the 3 lines that weren't academically rigorous. I wrote, no poodle and pit bull breeder could claim that the average difference between the 2 breeds is all environment. The other one was, every mother knows, even in utero, that their babies start with different personalities. And the third one is, fighting the achievement gap just by changing environment is like fighting a boxer with one arm tied behind your back. Although my thesis won dissertation of the year, no mainstream media would publish the results. I submitted it to 11, 10 no responses and one that said, we're concerned it could be perceived as racist. When the COVID pandemic began, I wrote an article contending that we should, with clear eyes, evaluate the wisdom of allowing natural immunity to occur rather than lock down society. The article raised the possibilities that more deaths might be prevented and economic and psychological costs reduced. The article also provided data that indicated that lockdowns restrict people's getting the micro-exposures we all get to various pathogens, which trigger immune responses and thus prevent serious illness. Unfortunately, someone used social media and letters to my wife's employer claiming I was a, quote, COVID denier and a, quote, deathmonger. My wife, understandably afraid of losing her good job, asked me to pull down the article, and I did. I still have much I could contribute, but I've become pretty inert. Maybe a little of it is my age, but more of it is that I'm scared that yet again I'll get the 3 C's, censured, censored, and canceled. I feel like a boxer who's gotten knocked down in the first 9 rounds. It's hard to motivate myself to come out for my 10th and final one. So here I am in my garden. That one is called My Wasted Potential. I guess there are 2 more at least. This one's called Hilda the Hypocrite. In 3rd grade, Hilda volunteered to lead her class's recycling drive. She didn't do it because she cared about the environment. She did it because she liked being in charge of something. She gave a speech about how recycling can save the earth and kicked off the campaign by ceremoniously emptying her desk's excess papers into the recycling bin, a vivid and public but easy way to show her, quote, commitment. That made some kids feel guilty if they threw even a tissue into the garbage rather than into the recycling bin. Little did they know that at home, because Hilda's apartment houses recycling bin was a few steps further than was the garbage bin, she'd usually toss her family recycling into the garbage. In Hilda's high school history class, she gave an oral report on the importance of diversity. She dug up stories of people of color accomplishing great things. But when she became student body vice president, which allowed her to pick 3 student senators, she chose 3 friends of her race and gender. After college, Hilda took a job at an environmental nonprofit. Again, her motive wasn't to help the environment, but so she could tell her friends she's working for an environmental nonprofit. When she became her work group's project lead, she stressed the importance of teamwork, but in practice, she rarely pulled her weight. Yet when the boss wanted pay raises to be equal for all members of the group, she argued that she should get more because she was the leader. In a Bible study class, she spoke against abortion. It's tough to be an environmentalist and anti-abortion. Overpopulation is a leading cause of environmental degradation. Besides, she had had an abortion. When teaching Sunday school, Hilda urged her students to turn the other cheek even when the other person is wrong. Yet when driving, even when returning home from teaching Sunday school, Hilda often gave the finger to someone who cut her off and then tailgated him. She did. Anyway, on Hilda's deathbed, she urged her family to work to support the environment, to help the poor, and to fight for the right to life. Tearfully, her family pledged to do so. Anyway, that's called Hilda the Hypocrite. No, I guess there are two more. This one's called The Man Who Stopped Talking. No, it wasn't a stroke, nor did he get hit by a bus. Richard stopped talking because he wanted to stop annoying people. Plus, he'd feel less burden to express his views, which rarely changed people's opinion. While intelligent, Richard's intense, rapid-fire delivery made people defensive. After most conversations, people were less likely to agree with him. Besides, being outspoken cost Richard his job. We're replacing you with someone more in step with the times. People's reaction to his sudden change from voluble to silent were of three types. Some people worried about Richard, that his silence, the denial of his essence, would devolve into suicide. Other people resented Richard's silence as he's feeling superior, no longer deigning to share his pearls. Still other people were relieved that they didn't need to hear any more of his political incorrectness, spouted with what they perceived as hubris. On one hand, Richard enjoyed his silence. He could better hear what others had to say. He found people directing their conversation to him. He was relieved of the burden of having to justify his out-of-step position. But his self-imposed silence also had downsides. He couldn't speak to clarify his thoughts, nor be the voice of reason that he considered himself. And of course, he was alone most of the time. Few people want to be with a person who says nothing. Richard pursued many solo activities: hiking, gardening, photography, playing the guitar, journaling, playing video games, and watching movies. While he appreciated the convenience of just-in-time watching at home, he occasionally liked going to movie theaters, especially to the one that showed classic films and that was largely empty. Rather than just sit there, Richard could wander the auditorium. It had been 5 months of silence. At the 10 p.m. showing of Marley and Me, he was wandering the aisles, but stopped when Marley, a dog, was dying. Richard contorted his face, trying to suppress tears, because he saw a woman in the audience noticing him. She came to him, touched his shoulder, and looked into his eyes supportively, and he said his first word in months, "Hi." And the final story. This is the final story. It's called Sam's Last Concert. In the wings, Sam could hear the concertmaster tuning up the orchestra. "Damn, my hand is shaking more than usual. It's a bad Parkinson's day. Plus, it's my last concert. I'm nervous. Glad I decided on the Grieg, but with these hands, nothing's easy." Sam had been a concert pianist his whole life. At age 11, he finished 4th in the Midwest Regional Young Artists Competition, and now at 83 had performed 45 concerts, including one with the Kansas City Symphony. He thought, true, that was just in the symphony's summer festival, when lots of the A players were on vacation, but still. Somehow, I wish my ex-wife were here. How could she have dumped me? I still wish she were here tonight. Do I play it safe? A lot of note mistakes would make the audience think I stayed at it too long, like those star baseball players who'd rather hit 200 than retire. Or do I go for a home run, a chance at a write-up in the Kansas City Star? Roseman finishes with a flourish. The conductor gave Sam a forced smile, and Sam strode on stage. This is it. Deep breaths, deep breaths. Damn, my hands are shaking more. I'm taking too long. I gotta get out there. Stand up straight. Old men hunch. Stride, don't shuffle. But Sam could manage only to shuffle on stage. He hung on to the piano with one hand as he bowed his head to the audience. If I tried to bow from the waist, I could fall. And he sat down at the piano. I've had this moment so many times, but this is different, he thought. Sam used his old trick of adjusting the seat up and then back down again, not because it needed adjusting, but to buy a little more time to ground himself before the moment of truth. And Sam began and took every reasonable risk he could, and most of the time he won. Yes, his boldness caused a few mistakes, but only the ignorant or mean-spirited could criticize his exciting performance. It was inspiring at any age, but for an 83-year-old with advanced Parkinson's, it gives me the chills just to write about it. And yes, Sam got not just the usual obligatory extended applause, bestowed as much to protest classical music's dying popularity as to acknowledge the performer, but fervent applause, and then, yes, a standing ovation. Not a charity ovation, a heartfelt one. And Sam, who usually was too shy to really look at the applauding audience and would stare at the back wall, soaked in the smiling, standing people. Then he sighed and plodded off stage for what he thought was the last time. Sam shuffled into his dressing room, closed the door, and dropped into a chair. I survived. I didn't embarrass myself, but I can't go to the reception. That's like a retirement party, where everyone tries to make light of it being the beginning of the end. My end. There was a knock at the door. Daddy? His daughter opened the door and gushed. You were amazing. You were really amazing. Come on, they're all waiting for you. Sam knew there was no avoiding it, so he trudged downstairs. When he arrived, the chatter morphed into applause. He thought, no one likes long speeches, and nothing ungracious. I should be a good boy. But he couldn't resist saying what he really felt. Honestly, I can't stand the thought that this would be my last performance, and he teared up. A 4-year-old toddled up to him. Do you want to play in my class? And Sam Roseman went on to play more concerts than he had in his entire life, in preschools and elementary schools, first just locally, then around the country. He never got paid, indeed had to pay his travel expenses, but didn't begrudge it. I can't think of a better way to spend my money than to teach young kids to love classical music, and that old people aren't necessarily irrelevant. Anyway, those are my 16 favorite stories from my just published book called Soloists. Short stories about outsiders and introverts facing a dilemma. In any event, I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. In any event, I like to end every one of these that are podcasts as well as YouTube videos by saying a quote from Frank A. Clark that I love and I believe is more valuable and critical now than ever before. We find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't.